Hello and welcome to Resilient Voices and Beyond. Welcome back, guys. It has been a very thrilling ride. I'm here with a very special guest. It's very coincidental how I met and discovered her. But I'm interested to hear more of her story on today and just talk about some of the things she works with and her experience and expertise. So without further ado, I'm gonna have her introduce herself.
Hey y'all, my name is Kara. I am based in Austin, Texas. I have been working with youth in foster care in different settings, in kind of different approaches, meeting different needs for the last, 5, 7 years now. I'm a student right now at the University of Houston, and I have a focus on abolition. So looking at how do we get rid of the systems that harm the people that social workers are intended to care for. So I could go on and on about the field of social work. It's very complex in the sense that it can be a site of great harm, and a lot of pain has been perpetuated by social workers. So I think because of that legacy of the field, there's a call for social workers to have an abolitionist approach and call for the end of these systems that hurt. So from working with foster care, I've seen how harmful the child welfare system, or I'm going to call it the family regulation system, is on families and is on communities. And so that my experience in work really motivated me to do more research onto the level of harm. And it was just like, the more I read and the more I saw work, I was like, you can't think there's any alternative but abolition. And yeah, that's a bit about me. I'm excited to be here and thank you for the invite.
No problem. Wow. So, man, my mind is just going. I have so many different questions. So I don't know if you know so much about my story, but I started on the juvenile side with the child welfare system, and then went into the foster care side, and then aged out of all of that. So it's interesting, as I've been interviewing people and getting different takes, talking to social workers, talking to people who run foundations, community organizations that help parents, prevention and all these different things. It's always interesting to me to just hear other people's accounts, their reason why, and all these different things. So if you don't mind me asking, you know, when you got into college, like how did you choose this, field of study? Like, how did it find you?
Well, it found me. To be very honest, I did not choose this. I've meandered through life and have just followed what felt good to my heart. So in my undergraduate, I studied gender and women's studies. So my focus was on how, as a society, do we make identity, and how does identity shape our lived experience? That's just the base of my undergrad experience. So from that, I found I really liked working with young people. And I lived in the Midwest, and I love the Midwest, but I also hate the Midwest. I hate the cold. And so I was like, I need to get out of here. I need to move to Texas. So I moved to Austin. I really was farting around. Like I worked at FedEx, I worked at a thrift store, I was in sales. Like I did a bunch of stuff, nothing that really made my heart sing. And I was like, I just really like working with young people. I like working with youth. And so I got on Indeed, looked for a job, and I found a youth care worker position at a residential treatment center. So for those who are listening and aren't familiar, a residential treatment center is a placement with CPS that is for youth with high levels of care. So what that means is when a youth is in the CPS system, they're assigned a level of care, which means what they deem the amount of support a child needs. And to be in a residential treatment center, it means they're a high level of care, meaning they need 24/7 supervision. Right. So as deemed by them. And so working there, like I went to my first shift and I was like, oh, this is 100% what I want to do. Like I loved the youth. Like I just love being around young people. Like, it's just so energizing for me. But also working there just like really opened my eyes to how traumatic the system is. And from there, it's been no going back.
Thank you for that. I appreciate you explaining that level of care thing, because like that brought me back to what I'm seeing now in the Midwest. I don't know if you're seeing it there, but I know it's a national problem with foster youth and the foster care system. Well, I say the child welfare system not having enough foster homes. Yeah. So with not having enough foster homes, they could be deemed, not at the level where CCIs or residentials are needed, but they don't have enough foster homes to put them. So they put them in juveniles and residential facilities for holding until they can find a better place. And what happens, when you put people in, residentials, because for me, my experience, residentials are like mini prisons and mini jails. Like, Right. What happens is that, that person doesn't understand why they're put in this facility and they did nothing wrong. So behavior issues start to become heightened, not just from the trauma, but because of the environment. And this is what we are seeing here in Michigan and across the country, with the lack of foster homes. And, unfortunately, there is reforms and things like that in the work, but it is years away from being active and so forth. So I kind of want to touch on that with you. You worked as a youth care worker. What was your experience like engaging with the youth and the different things that they were going through and everything as, a staff member?
Yeah. And what you said about basically we have kids who are being raised by institutions. We have kids who are being raised in psych hospitals. We have kids being raised in juvenile justice centers. We have kids being raised in treatment centers, which is like a hybrid of the both. And what that brought back to me is I remember I had a client who, where I worked, it was very strict. Treatment centers are very strict. There's a rule for everything. There's a rule for how many snacks you can have. There's a rule for what clothes you can wear. There, you name it, there's a rule for it. And I remember I had a youth say, it's like I'm being punished for being raped. And it was like, when you hear that, you can't unhear that. You can't forget that. Like that, her experience navigating the system, that's what it feels like to her. And like that really stuck out to me because I just remember working there and being like, it's hard for me to see this as the better alternative. It was really, really hard for me to witness violence, violence between clients, violence from clients and staff, like self-harm, suicidal ideation, like suicidal attempts, drug use, running away, being trafficked, like all these things that the system was supposed to quote unquote protect youth from, I saw happening in the treatment center. So it was really hard for me to understand, and I still don't understand, why it's better to have these kids in the system than to invest in their biological families and help them be safe in their biological families. Because what I saw was not safety, it was not love, it was not a home. So it's hard to see that this is better, especially now that we know that most youth who are in the system are there because of neglect. And so when we think about neglect being just a code word for poverty, it's hard to see that, a home that's going through poverty, is that really worse than being in a treatment center where there's all this violence and chaos detached from your original community? I just don't know. So it was very eye-opening for me because I think there's a lot of propaganda about the foster care system. I think if you haven't actually interacted with the system, I think people think it's nice families who take in these kids who come from terrible, abusive homes, and it's just a savior story. And that's not what I saw. That's not the world that I interact with. I see a lot of hurt and a lot of trauma caused by just being involved with the system.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So, you hit a lot of interesting points there. I can only say through, my own experience. So after 18, I aged out, went into the working world, kind of did similar to, like went out there and did all these different things, found my way working for juvenile facilities and residentials and stuff like that. And I actually, before even getting out of that field, and actually became a supervisor over a foster care program for a residential. But I did a youth care work and everything like that in the juveniles and in residential treatment facilities. And it was very eye-opening. I talked about this in my one of my other podcasts is that you have kids that are not supposed to really be there. Yeah. And then you have, because of like the lack of staffing wanting to be there, you have young people fresh out of college that aren't really trauma informed working with high risk population, and then you have incidents that occur. I remember being in there where you have young people that are around the same age. There's a lot of sexual grooming, going on. There's a lot of on the staff end, because of lack of trauma-informed training, they're easily triggered. So if a kid calls a staff member out of a B and stuff like that and everything, not a staff member want to fight a 14-year-old, and will fight a 14-year-old, or provoke a youth or somebody in the program, to try to get them to do something so they can restrain them, or do something to antagonize a fight, and tell like, hey, if you do this, I get you some hot Cheetos or something like that. I've seen it all, these are things that happen in prisons with adults that are happening with kids throughout our country, and stuff like that. And this is things that people are not realizing, and I think it's very important. And I'm glad that I brought you on here because, as a person that has been working through this, and had firsthand accounts, you've seen some things, and are still witnessing things that, just should not be, and it's that big question, is child welfare the better alternative? Is it really helping? Because what it does is more times than not, if a person has went to foster care from a certain amount of age to aging out, they have been re-traumatized in some way or fashion. The statistics show that they're going to end up probably homeless, that they're going to end up human trafficked or self-trafficked. They're going to end up either addicted to a substance or something, or they're going to end up dead or in the other adult side of the system, There's more statistics on negative factors after aging out of foster care than there is positive factors, and that is a big issue. And I know you kind of, we were talking prior to this about some disparities, and I know you've had some experience with that and understanding that, if you care to share.
Yeah, I think that just what you're saying resonates with me so much, is that my firsthand, what I've seen with my eyes tells me this doesn't work. And then in doing the research, I saw, oh, this really doesn't work. Like anyone who's interacted with the system, you just feel in your stomach, this isn't right. If you have genuine care for children and you see what they live through, your stomach tells you it's not right. This is not a childhood. This is not an upbringing. This is not okay. This is not safe. And that really motivated me to start looking into more of the empirical research that affirmed what I was already seeing. And so I started researching just like the different experiences, especially with the focus of race in the child welfare system or the family regulation system. And what really stuck out to me was an article I read on the New York Times that compared it, they called it the new Jane Crow. And the same way Jim Crow was a way to basically legalize slavery and legalize racial oppression, that is essentially how the family regulation system operates now, except for with a focus on Black women and Native women, that the system operates to surveil Black families, to disrupt Black communities, to destabilize Black communities. We see that on the disparities between investigations, between removals, between reunification, on every process and every step of the way is racist. Like there's no other way to slice it. Every step of the way, it has an extreme racial disparity. And I think it functions hand in hand with our prison system to destabilize the Black community and disempower the Black community in the United States.
Thank you for that. Thank you. We don't talk too much about that. You know, we stay on the surface of child welfare, which is foster care, or just the word child welfare, or unification or prevention. We don't get into the meat of it all and talk about how these systems are built up. Foster care system was built up from the orphan train. The orphan train was created around the time where there was still racial disparities and slavery and all these different things in these communities. And it's very similar because most of the systems that we have in this nation were built to correct and control these communities. And unfortunately, we've had a lot of different things that have happened, pandemics, and all these other things that have, kind of side noted it. But the reality is Black children get removed more than, Black and brown children get removed more than, Caucasian children or other races and so forth. That's a reality. That's a truth. What are we doing to prevent it? What are we doing to help it be different? I remember talking to a friend of mine, and I was explaining that I remember growing up in Detroit, and Detroit has always, since I've been alive, been a hardened, rough area, to say the least. And I still remember, where you would have someone on that neighborhood that would fall short, something to happen, a death or whichever, and that mom would become a single parent. And I remember the people in the community rallying, getting food, getting money together with whatever they had. Like, most of these people in this same neighborhood and in this same block probably are on welfare, and we're on welfare. And they are at a place where they're trying to help an individual person. And I was talking to my friend, I was like, why can't we do this as a system? Why can't we, get in there beforehand? Why can't we, invest more into, okay, we see when we come into the neighborhoods, people close their doors and shut their blinds and not answer, when they see the insignia of, that's CPS, they coming to get somebody kid. Like, there's these stigmas and labels that have been created because we feel unsafe. How can we change that narrative as people who work in the child welfare system, people that's focused on the reform and the prevention in these communities?
And I think the first step is always acknowledging the historical legacy, that it's not some unfounded paranoia that Black families in Detroit fear family removal. That's no boogeyman, that's the truth. And so I think the first step is really understanding the history that the child welfare system is built on. So that's something I'd like to speak through just a little bit. So we can take it back to the founding of America being based on slavery, and slavery was based on the removal of children. Slaves would have children and their children would be removed. And the white psyche did a lot of weird gymnastics to justify that violence. And one of the ways they did that was to construct the Black mother as unfit to parent. So the rhetoric at that time was that slave mothers were not fit to be mothers, and that's why it wasn't a crime or wrong or bad to take children and to sell them like cattle. That is the basis. That is the psyche that formed our country. And the same way slavery has shape-shifted in America, that thought process is shape-shifted in America. So there's still this racial control that's happening, but it just looks different. And so then we fast forward, because predominantly in the beginning of the child welfare system, it was mostly ethnic white families that were involved. And that is because Black families were discriminated against from interacting with welfare systems. And then with Johnson's New Deal, he brought a lot more racial progress in allowing access to social services to Black families. And there was more equity in families accessing welfare and accessing social support. And with that increase of Black families receiving welfare, changed America's perception of how a person who receives welfare is. And so when the welfare rolls started to become more Black, that's when we started to get this construction of a welfare queen, a Black mother who's not fit to parent. All she's doing is scamming. She's just having kids to make money. She's a bad mom. She's not fit to parent. She's lazy. She's entitled. This construction in our psyche, we can see that connects to something in the past. Mm-hmm. We can see in the past, during slavery, we had this image made of what a Black woman was, and we said, okay, we can take her kids. In the 60s and in the 90s, when we were building this image of a welfare queen, same thing. This image was built in our culture that said we can justify taking their kids. So this is this legacy we're built on. So now in 2022, I still have that psyche inside me. You know, I do my research, but I'm not special. I was socialized in this country, you know what I'm saying? So I think it's important, first and foremost, for us who work in the field to acknowledge, like, we still have that psyche. We're built on a 200-year legacy. Mm-hmm. No, going to a 3-day course on DEI isn't going to undo that psyche. Like, it's embedded into how we think. It's embedded to how we make our decisions. It's embedded to how we build systems. And so I think when we talk about what do we do now, I think first is we got to talk about what we did. I think that's the first step. It was like, we really need to acknowledge the harm that has happened. And I think until then, we can't go to step 2 because we haven't even really apologized for step 1 yet. That's how I feel.
Thank you. That's really deep. It's really deep. And as we continue to uncover, I'm pretty sure, we can go on this for hours because it's been centuries worth of, damage to these communities, if I can say that, damage. And what we're playing at now is damage control.
Exactly.
We're seeing things that we have enabled in these communities come back and bite us in the foster care system, if I can say the least. And there's a lot of generational things with parenting, Yeah. Unfortunately, for me, foster care saved my life, but also I would have loved to have been raised by my family and known that I would have been in a great environment.
Yeah.
I would have loved that, I feel like I could have taken a lot more, just family experience and stuff like that. But unfortunately, due to things that have happened in the Black community, and not, just specifically to the Black community, to our race and our people, there's a lot of generational things that are happening in the upbringing of children, and I personally feel that we need to do a better job as a people, as a nation, knowing that this has been the history, knowing that this is what is happening, and we're we got the crash cart out, we in the ER, trying to resuscitate, and knowing that is what we're doing, we need to do a better job in educating, supporting, you know. Unfortunately, we can't, like, putting somebody on food stamps is not enough. Getting somebody WIC is not enough. Giving somebody cash assistance is not enough. You know, we need people to step up to be mentors to these young parents, to some of these older parents. We need people to follow through, and be consistent, and showing, hey, you're not by yourself, to, the young Black man, to the young Black women, and to just young men and young women all over. It's going to take years to change this, but I'm a hopeful person. I'm very optimistic. Our child welfare system is substantially better than what it used to be, but it's far from being great. If it would ever be great, because the roots of what it was built in, and what it serves, shows that it's always going to be a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah. And I think we do what we do because we are optimistic. And what you're saying brings up the quote I shared with you that means a lot to me. So it's from Audre Lorde, and it says, "Without community, there is no liberation." And what that means to me is healing and freedom comes from each other, that we have the power to support and create a life and a world together that we want to live in. And I think that is something powerful about our position that we're in right now, is that the system is incredibly broken. Ask anyone on any side. That's the one thing we all agree on, is this system is broken. Whatever we're trying to do is not what's happening. And I think from that place of brokenness leaves a lot of opportunity for creativity and a lot of opportunity for new. And I think that is also why I love working with young people. And that's the power of young people, is the ability to imagine more and to demand more, that we really can create a society where we are there for each other, because a young parent shouldn't feel alone. That is an option for us to have a community that supports and uplifts each other and gets through hard times together, rather than surveils and punishes each other. It is an option for us to have a more loving, compassionate society, and we can build systems that reflect those values. That is an option. And I think it's about having people in strategic placement to make that happen, to make that dream a reality. And I also think it's the role of everyone, and especially young people, to dream that and continue to call for that, and to continue to not accept this anti-human policies that we have right now. But I am a very optimistic person. It's why I do what I do, because I believe profoundly in the power of people to care for each other, essentially.
Thank you. Only have a couple more questions for you, and I just want to say I thank you for, being available and sharing this time with me, because we're in Black History Month, and what better way to have this conversation about disparities and the racism that is a part of our child welfare system, and to talk about, the things that are possible and things that we can get to, I think there's no better month to have this conversation and bring this conversation to the forefront, in hopes that what we've talked about here, invokes deeper conversations in the homes, in the community, and in the offices, and so forth. But my last couple questions are: what advice could you give to alumni or youth that are in care currently? And what advice could you give, additional to that, to parents that may be in places and at risk of losing their kids?
Yeah.
And lastly, what advice could you give to young professionals working in this field and seeing the hurt, the pain, and the trauma on a daily? So
Those are big, those are heavy. So for youth who are currently in the system, my one piece of advice would be to try your hardest to not internalize the negative messaging that you get. And I know that's a very, very big request, but the system's failures are not your personal failures. And it is the ways that young people have been let down and hurt and harmed and misled is not their fault. And it's heartbreaking for me because I feel that even though it's not their fault, they're still dealing with the consequences of these policy failures and system failures, but still it's not their fault. And as a young person, I would recommend finding the things that make you feel like you have value and make you feel like you have worth, and invest into those and listen to those and be around people who amplify you up, and just tune out all the negativity that comes with all the stereotypes that come of kids who are in the system. And for families who are at risk of involvement, know your rights. Really know your rights and advocate and stand 10 toes down. It is a very, very hard fight. I have worked with families who are going through that fight, and you're set up to fail. You are assumed guilty until innocent. It is a very, very hard fight, especially if you're poor, especially if you have disabilities, especially if you have mental illness. It's very difficult. If you have substance use history, it's a very, very difficult and unfair fight. And so I would say to those families, you are 100% justified in your anger. And I wish that we can live in a society where when someone makes a mistake, we support them rather than punish them. And for young professionals, protect your heart. Keep your heart 3 stacks. This is a hard job. So do the things that make you feel alive, do the things that make you feel good. And like something that I had to realize to tell myself, like, this is how I'm paying my bills for the next 40 years. I need to calm down. I need to pace myself. Like, this is how I'm going to be able to pay my rent when I'm 40. So I need to be able to pay my rent when I'm 40. So I need to take care of myself now. I need to invest in myself now so that I can make sure that my bills are paid when I'm 40, because I'm not trying to be burnt out. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so that was a reality check I had to give myself. Like, damn, Kara, you cannot, or dang, Kara, sorry, I cursed. Dang, Kara, you cannot save the world in one day. You cannot save the world in one generation. Like, you need to pace yourself.
Thank you. Wow. That advice was so sound. I'm gonna take some of that for myself, if you don't mind. Yeah. Last question, last 2 questions.
Right.
Is what's next for you?
Everything. Life is for living. That's my number one motto. Life is for living. And so I think I found my calling, and I think it's to always continue to pursue what feels like my truest calling. So what specifically is next? I don't know. Stay tuned. But I'm excited for whatever it is.
Awesome. And then my last question, I've asked this, so many different ways, but COVID is happening, it's everywhere, it's hit people differently, how has it affected you, and how have you dealt with it in your profession? And
in my profession,
it's been also hard.
So I'm right now at an emergency shelter, so we can't stop. People don't stop needing housing. Youth don't stop needing housing because of the pandemic. And so it's required a lot of creativity and a lot of tenacity. And also what I've learned is it calls for a lot of advocacy and a completely different conversation. I don't need to open up a box of worms, but the way workers in this field are treated is kind of a mirror for how we value the youth in the system. We don't value these youth, and we don't value the people who care for them. And so I've seen a lot of my coworkers really step up and advocate for workers who are working during the pandemic. So that has been really cool, as being in the pandemic and seeing kind of more focus on well-being and more value and more conversation being dedicated to holistic well-being. So that's kind of what it's been like professionally. Personally, I've picked up like 15 new hobbies. I like run now. I'm a runner now.
Okay.
So lock me in the house, and I just got so bored. I was like, shoot, I guess I'm running. And I just started running. I really like being creative. That's been really important to me. So like painting and sewing has been really important to me, baking, and also just learning to have more value on my alone time. It's not so scary to be by myself anymore.
Awesome. Well, any last thoughts that you may have for the listeners or for myself or whichever?
Just that I appreciate you. I think these are really important conversations that, people are working to get towards the forefront. There's a lot of really incredible organizations who are doing this work to protect children and to protect families and to name and heal this harm. But it feels like a big fight. And I feel like, for me personally, it feels like there's not enough awareness to this injustice. So I really, really appreciate you creating space to talk about this, and you creating dialogue and using your personal skills to give light to something that I think needs to be brought more to light.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. It's been a hard fight. It's been a hard fight, and it's a continuous fight. But much like many people before me, this is my calling. This is what I feel like I'm brought to do, and I'm going to continue to do it with all my being. I'm going to continue to work on self-care and continue to take care of my mental health in doing this, because re-traumatization, is real. You can get traumatized by just working with your clients. It can affect your mental health. I make sure that I continue to work on my mental health and maintaining a good balance of self-care while doing this. But I also know that I personally feel, and this may be different from my listeners, or for yourself, I personally feel that this is what my purpose is, and this is what I've been called to do. So, after I'm gone, I hope that all that I do onto this world means something for somebody else, not really for myself, but for somebody else, so that mantle could be passed on in some fitting fashion of a legacy. I love what I do. It was a reason why I went through what I went through. It sucked, but it was a reason why I went through what I went through, to be able to help youth, to be able to help, young adults and so forth, and to change and reform the system that has been breaking the backs of parents, and filling itself with our children and so forth. But I want to thank you for being on. I want to thank you for your sound, advice and just your wisdom. I would love to have you back, just so invoke more conversation around this subject and other things that you may be doing and so forth. But this is Resilient Voices and Beyond. I hope you guys have a good night, good day, good evening, good whenever you're listening to this. Please stay safe. I'm not going to get political about it, but if you're vaccinated, or if you're thinking about getting vaccinated, do whichever. Just take the precautions that are necessary. Wear a mask, do what you got to do, sanitize. Don't think sanitizing is just it. You do need to wash your hands after sanitizing a couple times and stuff like that and so forth. But COVID is real. So please just protect yourself and protect your village and protect your community. It takes all of us, and not just one of us. So I love you guys. Keep listening. Stay tuned.
Thank you.